Okay. Well, hello everybody. Welcome to Semantic Kernel Community Office Hours. I apologize, my voice is a little shot, or I'm recovering from a little bit of a cold. Uh, but I'm still here, back from vacation. So I know that Craig, Evan, and others did office hours last week. Hopefully you all had a good session there, but we have some good content, good questions to go over this week as well from office hours. Disclaimer that these are, of course, public community office hours, so only make sure you share or um, disclose things that you're comfortable talking about in the open, in the public. But as is, right, it's also open for you to contribute anything that you want. So if you have a question you want to ask, if you want to either raise your hand or put it in the chat, we'll feel free to get to that question or bring it up directly during the hour. So yeah, so with that, welcome to today's session. So a few kind of announcements first is we have this survey that's out right now. Actually, I'll link it in the chat as well if you haven't already filled it out. But we want to learn more about you, learn about the community, and actually like how we can serve you better, how we can make investments in things like events or activities that we can do to make being a part of the Semantic Kernel community a better experience. So if you could fill that out, that would be awesome if you haven't already. And yeah, that would just help us out a lot. In terms of other announcements, we have several new blogs that have come out. A very cool one for using natural language to generate SQL queries. This is a very popular use case that has come up all across internally at Microsoft, but also certainly stuff that we've heard from Discord or from enterprises as well. So we have this blog post that represents our implementation because it's an emerging area, it's an active research area as well. So we've made an attempt to answer that problem, or at least contribute there. So definitely check that out. We made some earlier announcements maybe a month ago about telemetry or introducing telemetry. So now we have a more comprehensive blog post about that. Telemetry is, again, actually a big piece of the semantic kernel. Actually, do I have this? I had this up. I want to actually double click on this a bit more because there's, I hear a lot about people wanting to, when they're building their AI applications, right, they want to do things like, oh, like how many tokens is my model using, or how do I debug, right? How do I make sure that I don't introduce any errors or do some sort of like proactive work to do some inspection. So that's what the telemetry is all about, right? Both as you're developing your products or even if you've deployed them and you want to just really make sure that you have just a more X-ray style view into what's going on behind the scenes. So everything from tracing, right, to metering, to what else is here? Well, those are the top level ones, but there's a lot here, so definitely check that out. I'll also just go ahead and link this in the chat as well. But yes, so that's another blog to call out. We have another blog about testing your ChatGPT plugins in the updated Chat Copilot. So Chat Copilot is the new destination. Again, if this has already been shared last time, apologies, but just bringing it up again. The new home for the Chat Copilot app is under its own repo now, but it is the go-to sample for building a reference chatbot implementation. But not only that, it has all the goodies around incorporating Planner, right, with your plugins that you're writing, as well as being able to test the plugins themselves as you would. Normally, before you would have to do that with ChatGPT, the platform. But now you could actually just test it directly inside a locally deployed or Azure deployed Chat Copilot. So yeah, important things to check out. Some other things on the Python side that I particularly want to call out is we've had this maybe for a couple weeks now, but just recently I updated the Jupyter notebooks to at least show off what some of the other new planners look like. So we have sequential planner, action planner inside Python, and soon to be stepwise planner as well. So yeah, make sure to check that out, play around with it, give us feedback. Planner is a big area in Semantic Kernel. If you remember, it's plugins, planners, and personas. So we want to make sure that, yeah, not just C#, but Python and soon Java as well has they all have the best support for it. Okay, the other thing to call out is we actually updated our README. So if you refresh the GitHub page for Semantic Kernel, you might have seen a brand new README. There's a new image at the very beginning. So yeah, definitely take a look. Maybe you could use it in your slide decks if you're presenting it to your boss or whoever, customers. But yeah, feel free to give that a read. And I think this was something I want to do a bit more going forward, is each office hour I'll call out the latest releases. So at least by number, maybe not by all their exhaustive features that have landed, because there's a lot. You all can read the release notes. But from .NET, Python, Java, these are the latest, as reflected on the GitHub release tab on the right-hand side of the page. So yeah, definitely check those out. All the latest. There will be some breaking things, and we're going to try to do our best to call out what things break inside the release notes. We'll communicate it as much as we can on Discord and other channels, but there will occasionally be times where maybe something falls through the cracks. So the source of truth will always be GitHub, and yeah, what's there, and hopefully what is released is the latest of that. So with that, while my voice is still here, Craig, do you want to say any intro words before we kick off of anything that you've seen from Semantic Kernel, or that you've seen in the community?
I've seen a lot, Alex. I've seen a lot. I would say the only thing slightly notable, and that it's not called out here, and it's not a breaking change, but we did obsolete in the .NET version, the importing of Open API and importing of ChatGPT plugin methods as distinct extension methods. We folded that into one new extension method called import AI plugin, I believe. I actually wrote it, so I should know what it's called. But that's one change. So you might see some things that are obsolete, but don't worry, we haven't removed the functionality. We've simplified it. We've put it into one single function call. And so now you can point it to a ChatGPT plugin, or you can point it to an Open API endpoint, and it will import either of those.
Awesome. Is it in the latest NuGet package, or?
Yeah, it's in 0.19 because I have a little side project I've been working on, a researcher, and I needed that change to come in, and finally it came in. So yes, it is in 0.19.
Nice. Well, definitely check it out. All right. Well, with that, again, if you have questions, feel free to leave it in chat or just raise your hand. But we have some content to go through first off. So I'll start off with a question from Discord, actually. So Kevin asked, so maybe a question from a newbie, but when using memories, we create embeddings by an existing model. If this model is retired and replaced by a more performant model, should we have to recreate all embeddings in the memory?
This is a good question. We've had text embedding ADA 002 or whatever the correct ordering of those words is for quite a while, and like probably 8 or 9 months now. It's been there for a long time. Embeddings are model specific, is my understanding. And so if you do have a large corpus of embeddings and you change from one model, let's say you went for a model that's not OpenAI. Let's say you went and used a Hugging Face model. You would have to go and generate the embeddings again for everything that you've done previously. So this is one area where you need to be thoughtful about any changes that you might make in future. For most people, the cost of embeddings generation is very low. It's like many fractions of a cent, if I'm right, from OpenAI, and the Hugging Face one you run yourself. So that's your computer's your cost there. So it is a good question. You would have to recreate them all. And even if you do, think about it this way also, when you have a set of embeddings stored in a vector database somewhere, and you want to do a comparison, usually your comparison is text or some other, some material coming in. With that chunk of text, you will generate an embedding for that chunk of text to compare against your existing embeddings in the vector database. Good question.
Yeah, the way I think of it is anything that comes out from a model, especially a maybe non-deterministic model, you want to effectively version them with the model ID that you're using. Because yes, anytime you want to run anything against it, you will have to run it with that exact model ID, model version. So, and especially in a application setting, right? You've created embeddings, right? But that's not the end all of that life cycle, right? Because every time you're making a query, right, and you're doing a vector similarity comparison, you're also embedding the query itself, or you're running that ask into the embedding model and getting a result back, or getting that and comparing that to the vectors. So the yes, short answer, as I answered this on Discord also, is yes, you do need to unfortunately spend the money to recreate the embeddings if you choose a different model each time. But yes, good question. Okay, so one more question from Discord is from L46Ron. Hi, does anyone have any recommendations for my workflow? I want to expose my kernel via an endpoint so multiple clients can access it. It needs to be a chatbot, so the context needs to be there. How would I go about achieving this? Would each chat have to have a new ID associated with it, or would it make sense to just send the chat history back and forth between the request and response?
Yeah, so this one, there's a few different ways to think about this. If you're using Chat Copilot, and that's what we're talking about, then that is a different problem to solve than if you are doing your own bespoke implementation, which I think is what's being talked about here. This person has some custom implementation. So I would say it's very similar to any multi-tenant problem that you need to solve. You need to have a way to, I would suggest doing a kernel instance per request. That's typically what we do. So whether it's a kernel instance per request in a single tenant solution, or it's a kernel per request in a multi-tenant solution, it's kind of the same process. The context needs to be there. So this talks more about, I think, the history, like keeping a repository of prior chat messages so that you can then augment any requests that go to the model with those prior chat messages. So the way I have done this in the past with multi-tenant applications, I've used subdomain as my tenant identifier. And then for each message that comes in on that subdomain, I store it in a repository with that tenant ID as part of the object that I store. So I think from the kernel's perspective, it doesn't care. And the way we typically use it again is per request, we spin up a new instance of the kernel. We have it pull in any plugins it needs to at that moment in time, and it serves a request, and then it's destroyed. We get rid of the kernel. So this problem is more about how you store your data, which again is a very simple, a very standard thing. If you look up any multi-tenant architecture, they'll all have a very similar pattern.
Awesome. Very good. Thank you, Craig. Yeah, if anyone else wants to comment on how they are building these type of apps, feel free. Drop a comment in the chat. Okay, we actually have some more from Discord. Thank you. Thank you for asking these questions on Discord. So Augustine asked, I have a question related to the operation of the memories. Currently in my app, I am using the Azure Cognitive Search memory store to store the chunks of information from my local database in the vector memory. The thing is that when using search async, the memory only returns the chunks that it considers most relevant, which doesn't always get what I need. And then I have to pass those chunks through a semantic function to get a response chord. Is there a way to internally map the chunks in memory and ensure a more effective response from the search async method?
Yeah, so it's cosine similarity. So we're going to assume this is the vector version of Cog Search, because originally we had a semantic version, which is not vector. Now we have only vector, so it requires embeddings. Okay, so vector is mentioned. So what I would suggest here is you're doing your cosine similarity matching. You have the option to increase or decrease the, what was that value there? Do you remember, Alex, what we call that parameter? The
relevance? Or
the relevance. Yes, you can increase or decrease the relevance. And if you decrease the relevance, you'll get more responses, which may not be what you want. If you increase the relevance, you'll get fewer responses, which doesn't always get what you need from the sounds. Internally map the chunks. Part of this is the way you've stored it. So you would do this offline. Typically, you would offline generate your embeddings, and then online is where your application is actually solving a problem for somebody. So it might be the way you're chunking the content, and there's various strategies to think about chunking. One of them is overlapping. So let's say you have a large document that has more content than fits in a token window. So more than 4,000 tokens. I've forgotten what the embedding limit is. Let's say it's 4,000 tokens. Let's say you have 5,000 tokens. You definitely need to chunk it. You need to slice it up in order to generate the embeddings and store them. You might want to take from token 0 to or 1 to 3,000 as one chunk. And then you might want to take from token 2,500 to I don't know, 4,000, and then 3,500 to 5,000. You might want to overlap the chunks to help you with relevance. There's some other strategies. I don't think we've really cracked the code on the best way to chunk general purpose. Did you have a thought on this, Alex?
no, but one thing I will at least tease the listeners for, or two, is that I'm going to have a very in-depth interview with the lead PM for Azure Cognitive Search sometime, maybe next week, but like going over very in detail, like all these different strategies, all these, like what is happening behind the scenes of Azure Cog Search, and yeah, like what to think about. It is very true that the chunking strategy that you use is very important, because if you just think about it, if you could in theory embed an entire document, let's say, but if you in your application, right, you only require like one section of that document to have the answer, then well, it makes sense that you probably should have created a chunk that only had that section that you wanted, right? So however that section is defined, right? Maybe you could do it by token count, as Craig said. You could do it by special delimiters in the page, maybe if there are any. But yeah, these different strategies ultimately help you, create a better result. And it's an honestly a experimental step that you have to play around with. So I don't know if anyone on the call has any advice for us or for Augustine, but yeah, please raise your hand or let us know. yes, Augustine, for this, I would say, yeah, maybe if you're not getting the relevant results, then maybe rethink the chunking that you're actually the chunking strategy you're using, the splitting strategy of the text or whatever that you're embedding, and then retry again. And you could also play around with the relevance parameter that Craig mentioned as well, because it's always a trade-off between precision and recall, right? If you lower the threshold, right, you could get basically all the results back, and yeah, your answer will be there. But how are you going to then filter among all those to get the most relevant result? Yes, good question. And stay tuned for that conversation with the PM from Azure Cognitive Search. Okay, next question that we have from Anthony is function response streaming in the .NET branch. It's a very succinct question, but
yeah, this is function. I assume this is function calling, which was supported by the newer models, which I believe was finally prioritized. I don't know if the work has actually begun, completed. Do you know, Alex? I know you were out last week, so maybe.
so what I do know is that from the Python side, so if we're referring to function calling, then yes, we actually have a community member implement a first pass of what function calling looks like inside Python semantic kernel. So if people are interested, I'll just drop it in the chat to look. If you all are able to, add comments or review it, that would be great. So, if you take a look at this code, there's quite a lot of changes because it does require some rethinking inside for the semantic kernel. But as for the original question for whether this or when is this coming for .NET, I'm not sure exactly. I can't give that answer right now. But when I first saw this question, I was wondering if it meant just streaming, and something about just like response streaming, because streaming is there today, right? You could stream the results for both chat completion and text completion models in .NET. So, but yeah, if this is function related, then yes, or OpenAI function specifically related, then yes, this is not yet in .NET. Okay, cool. Next question from Sani. Can we integrate SK into legacy applications such as apps running on .NET Framework 4.6? The example I've come across on GitHub uses .NET 6.7, .NET 6, .NET 7, and 6 and 7 does make things really easy and straightforward, but simple web API application, .NET Framework 4.6 using SK would be appreciated. Thank you for the kind words. But yes, so this question, .NET Framework 4.6.
Yeah, so early on, we were targeting .NET Standard 2.1, which does not, I think it was .NET 4.8. It's very confusing the way .NET evolved over time. So bear with me. So we were originally targeting .NET Standard 2.1, which I think means that you could not do anything earlier than the .NET Framework 4.8. And then we showed a bunch of people, early code, people inside Microsoft, people outside Microsoft, and we got some feedback saying, I love the new .NET stuff, but unfortunately I am part of a team that has a legacy .NET implementation. We're stuck. We cannot go past .NET 4.6 or 4.6.2, I think specifically. And so we said, okay, we'll go and do the work, and we'll, instead of going for .NET Standard 2.1, we went to .NET Standard 2, which I believe does give you support in .NET Framework 4.6. So while all of our examples that we're putting out are targeting .NET 6, .NET 7, probably in future .NET 8, the ecosystem for .NET is moving forward quickly. We'll probably stay close to the most recent version of .NET for our samples on GitHub. However, the underlying code will allow you to do .NET Framework 4.6. We probably won't do samples using .NET Framework 4.6, would be my suspicion, but you definitely can go and right-click, add a NuGet package, and target. You could do a web API app with .NET Framework 4.6. And if you tried this and it didn't work, please open an issue on GitHub. It should work.
Yes. Craig, as you're explaining that, I could not track the history of .NET, and I have no idea what that is.
It's painful. It's what they did. They started doing .NET Framework. That was the first version. And then the Mono project came out. It was Novell, I think, that started doing this, Miguel Diaz and others. And then there was this like other implementation of .NET for Linux and Mac. And then the .NET team decided, okay, that's an interesting idea. We should embrace that. And so then they went and made the .NET standard libraries, which is supposed to be the standard way of everyone implementing .NET for other platforms. And then there was .NET Core, which was a runtime, I think, for .NET that ran across different platforms. And these days now, it's from .NET 5 and onwards, it's assumed cross-platform. So if you target .NET 5, 6, 7, or 8, which is, I think, launching very soon if it hasn't already, you have cross-platform support. There's a big, you can go look it up. There's this big table that has, here's what .NET Standard means, here's what .NET Framework means, here's what .NET Core is, here's what .NET 5 and beyond is. So yes, little history lesson there.
Fascinating. Well, thank you, Craig. Okay, we actually have one last submitted question, and we'll feel free to open it up to the floor to talk about anything else. But Daniel asks, how does Semantic Kernel handle errors when the OpenAI API fails for whatever reason? I have the following code where chat is a semantic function that generates an answer based on a user's input. When I get an error, like this error, a 500 internal server error, it is printed and stored in the context dictionary as if it were a correct answer. How can I make it recognize these types of errors or raise an exception? And he provides this link to the error types.
Yeah, I'm going to assume this is in Python where this error is happening, just because it says Python library error types, the message there. It might be that we are storing things somewhere that we shouldn't be, because I think like for an error, we have on the .NET side, you get the error from, I actually think it does come through the context as well, maybe, or it did at one point come through the context. Go back to the question for 1 second, Alex. So how does it handle errors when it fails? Yeah, 500 is a strange one. If you're getting a 500 status code, that internal server error, that's implying that it's coming from Azure OpenAI or OpenAI, I think is what they're talking about in this case. Those are strange ones. Usually you get a 400 or something like that if you have too many tokens in your request. Getting a 500. Strange one. Have you ever seen 500s, Alex? Or anyone else on the call?
Not
or is
often
Daniel on
for
the
me.
call? Are you on the call, Daniel? If you are, feel free to jump off mute and fill in the gaps here. Oh, you're getting them yesterday. Okay. Yeah, rate limit exceeded. Okay. Is this Python that you're using? Python. Okay. Do we have retry logic in Python, Alex? Do you know? In the .NET version, we have some like standard default retry handler that's injected in, and it tries to do it, I think, 5 times. Or retry logic. Let me look this up.
I forget exactly what is in the Python side for retry logic.
Add HTTP retry logic. Yeah, I see something on .NET, but it's quite old. It's March 11th. Python release. Yeah, it might be that we have, so we have retry logic to pinecone integration test. That's independent. That's nothing to do with the kernel. Maybe we're missing some stuff in the Python implementation. Yeah, if we're missing it, you'd have to do your own retry, which will be a little bit painful, especially if you're getting these things that end up in the context dictionary.
Yeah, this does sound very strange that this is happening. I haven't actually come across this myself, or seen others run into this, but yeah, I'll definitely pass this along to the Python team, and we could do a deeper look.
Yeah, and if possible, Daniel, can you open an issue on GitHub if you haven't already? Maybe, I don't know if it's easy to repro, but if you have a very small code sample, open a kernel like this, and try to invoke this semantic skill, or sorry, semantic function, that'll give us something to then go and work off. But this sounds not great. We should fix this if it's something that's broken.
Yes, for sure. Okay, while we do that, a good question just came in from PySharp. I'll just go type it here so we can see it. How would you handle debugging, and especially unit tests for a custom plugin, CI/CD testing pipelines?
Yeah, this is a good question and has been top of mind for me recently. I've written a couple of plugins. They're just Azure functions that I'm doing. So I have the Open API extension for Azure functions, and it just generates Swagger, and then I have the Swagger UI. I can go in the Swagger UI, I just type it in, see if my queries work. It's not very, it's very manual. Like none of that's automated. That's just me clicking through. The way I've been deploying custom plugins is as an endpoint. And so if your plugin is also an endpoint, HTTP accessible endpoint, you could use any strategies that you typically would use to test an endpoint, or even just the code inside the endpoint independent of the endpoint itself. Unit tests against the services or whatever you're calling inside of there. CI/CD testing pipelines. We do have some integration tests. We have some unit tests. I'm trying to think if any of our plugins that are on there run through that. It also depends. Is your plugin calling OpenAI? Is it calling Azure OpenAI? If it is, ideally when you're testing it, you want to have it use the model during testing, the same model that you use in production. I wrote a fuzzy assertion thing. Let me see if I can find that. Can't remember what it's called. Let me find it. It's on my GitHub somewhere. Because the problem, yeah, go ahead.
No.
Go ahead, Alex.
I was going to say, while you're pulling that up, if anyone else has, ideas or tips on how to test plugins, or debug plugins, please feel free to share. But I will pull up this thing, Craig.
Yeah, so yeah, and again, feel free to jump in and interrupt me if someone else has a better answer. But so the problem with assertions with a large language model is you don't have deterministic results, meaning that typically when you do a unit test or something like this, you have an expected result, and it's always the same. And over here with the large language model, it's not always the same. You'll get something probably similar. So I wrote this small assertion library. It's in .NET, so I apologize if you're a Python person, but the same principles could definitely be done in Python or Java or wherever. The general premise is that you'll have a series of like, here's roughly what should occur, and then you ask the model to evaluate what did occur versus what you expect to occur, and the model decides if it thinks that it's equivalent or not. So it's not bulletproof, it's still kind of like an early thing, but it seems to work quite well. And these same principles were used in Chat Copilot in one of the integration tests, integration unit, one or the other, on that repository as well.
Right, does this only apply to semantic function type plugins, or like in terms of the considerations that you're bringing up, or if people are just writing native code type plugins and exposing them as a plugin, is it the same?
If you're just doing regular code, you're just going to do the standard unit testing, standard integration testing that you would do for any other library that you're deploying. And if it's an endpoint, again, just whatever you would typically use for an endpoint to verify whatever it is you want to verify, that's all the same. The only thing we do when we expose it as a plugin is we have this Swagger endpoint. And when we have the open API spec, which Swagger will do for you, the only thing there you want to make sure of is the description. You type in the name for human, the name for the model, the description of all of the methods or the functions that are exposed in your plugin. Those are things that you need to put a little bit of thought into, and you should also ask the model to help suggest the right declaration for those for you, because those are what planning, like the stepwise planner, sequential planner, or whatever it is, will look at to determine which plugin and which function within that plugin specifically to call at a given moment in time.
Yep. Yeah, to make sure that Planner can pick these things up, and this is why you would want to even design a plugin in the first place, at least with Semantic Kernel, right? And you want to probably hook it up to Planner. You have to just be very descriptive, describe the what the plugin does, but also the parameters of it, and yeah, it can make it more reliable in terms of what you can expect from it. Okay, we have another question from Matthew on chat about specifically, can you share any samples or patterns you're seeing around the use of Semantic Kernel and Azure Prompt Flow together? So very quickly, there is if I would need to dig for it, but if you look on YouTube and you type in Semantic Kernel, Azure, and Prompt Flow, there is at least a preview of what that looks like, of that integration together. We are actually working on something from our team, and we'll likely publish it soon, more of that relationship. But Matthew, if you don't mind, maybe coming off mute, do you mind asking like what you'd like to see, and maybe we could make sure we incorporate it?
Yeah, happy to. Appreciate you taking the time for the question. It's the question has come up. I'm in a role where I work with a variety of different customers coming up with ideas around using, yeah, how they're going to build their Copilot, right? And oftentimes the question around prompt flow, semantic kernel, the uses of them together, or when to use one versus the other clearly, kind of the way they can work together, is one of the areas I was looking for some feedback or detail on, knowing there will be kind of a blend of those based on specific use cases that come up, but it's a variety of conversations that I'm in, so I don't have a specific scenario, right?
Yeah, and that's fair. I mean, I think when Prompt Flow got announced at Build, a lot of inbound interest or questions came our way because it was like put alongside Semantic Kernel, as well as LangChain even too. But it was just like, oh, this is like a thing. And then everyone's like, oh, I want that thing. Can you show me what it looks like? So we are now catching up to that vision that was casted at Build.
And I saw, I've seen a couple of different snippets of it in videos online. One of them included, it looked like it was doing basically just an inline Python call from Prompt Flow to using Semantic Kernel, but it wasn't really described what was going on, nor was it a public sample. It was, just flashed on the screen. So I can see that. I can also see it the other way of, even using like a native function to call a published, Prompt Flow endpoint as part of something that you're doing. But beyond the high level concept there, I'm just looking for any potential detail. And if the answer is wait, more to come, fair enough. Just curious if I'd maybe missed something or I'm missing the obvious.
No, we'll make sure to publish something soon, and likely it could even be on our blog later. So make sure to just refresh the page for that.
Excellent, thanks.
Cool. So I see Phi added some more commentary or questions. Phi, if you don't mind coming off mute, if you're able to, that would be great. Otherwise, I could just read your question or read what you typed. So you wrote, concerning authentication and authorization mechanisms when creating my custom plugins to access external services or APIs. Are there any specific guidelines or examples that illustrate different authentication processes? I bet using secrets in the key vault is a must.
Yeah, so on this one, I would say you have, again, the standard way of doing things. There'll be, it depends. So if you want the user's identity to flow through your plugin and then through to a third-party service, that's a different problem to solve than if you have your service that calls like something that requires an API key. So API key, yeah, just use Key Vault, have your plugin that I'm assuming is hosted somewhere on an endpoint, consume the Key Vault, pull the key out, and then make that request. Passing the user stuff through, the open, let me find the spec. There is a user, sorry, there's a open API v3. There is a parameter in the spec that gives the ability for the open API definition to say that it requires authentication. Let's see if I can find this. I think it's on an open AI GPT plugin. I'll find this. Find it. I was talking to someone about this yesterday. So having the ability to authentication. Let's just drop this on here. So it's kind of two different places you need to think about it. So yeah, you want to protect the keys for anything that you're calling in your plugin, standard process, key vaults, or some other good way of storing the keys. And then you want to think about the user calling your plugin. Do you limit it to certain users? Do you have to have like membership in a group or something in order to call that? And part of the open AI spec that I just dropped in there, there is a what is it? The authorization type. So you can use bearer tokens. There's a bunch of different options here. I haven't used any of them yet, and just no authentication on my plugins. So I have not done this myself. There is a way to do it. I would suggest reading through that link that I popped in there, and let us know next week if you have more questions on that one.
Cool. Daniel, okay, so Daniel, you're saying like if you have an input, okay, going back to the Python API error, like catching those errors, you're saying that if the input's not valid because it doesn't pass some sort of like content filter, then you want to be able to control those type of errors, right? And I was trying to type this, but I don't know right now what exactly is inside the Python for error handling, especially for this. So this is where I need to follow up. But if you could file a GitHub issue with basically exactly like what you're saying, you could just copy paste it. I think that would be helpful. Yeah, that'd be good. Okay. We have actually 10 minutes left, or 9 minutes. Are there any questions or comments or anything that anyone on the call wants to just talk about? We are here to chat. And if there are any cool things, oh, go ahead.
I was about to say the same thing. If anyone's working on anything cool or interesting that they're willing to share publicly, we'd love to learn about it as well.
Yes. And don't be shy, just come off mute, just start talking.
I personally have no questions. I just wanted to pop off mute and express a bit of gratitude. Kind of being new here, love to be able to hop in, see what's going on, learn things. So yeah, these office hours have real value. So yeah, just a note of thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Hopefully see you next week.
Yeah, Matthew, what's your background, or where are you coming from? What are you working on?
I'm a product manager working at a local SaaS company in Idaho, and so little bit of my interest, of course, is work based. A little bit of my interest, of course, is geek based. You know, I think all of us are just excited about the times that we live in right now, and I'm having a good time immersing myself and learning and embracing the new frontier that we're all crafting together.
For sure. Yeah.
I tell that to all my friends, tech geeks or non-tech geeks. You know, the adage that we've kind of seen float around the internet. I tell everybody, AI is not going to take your job, but somebody using AI will. So you need to get on board.
I think that is very wise advice. All right. Anyone else wants to share or say anything?
Hey, just want to, reiterate on the things. I think we all are on this boat of getting into it and trying to learn as fast as we can. Me in particular, I have from years of backend development and software architecture, but now I'm really deep into it and getting up to date. Actually, I'm trying to create a small startup on this, and I was thinking a lot about using some of the I don't know, the other implementations in Python, and finally I realized that I have so much learned of the .NET back. So I love the idea of using .NET and using C# for this instead of everything else is Python everywhere. I know I also love Python. I write Python as well, but my eternal love is C#. So I'm really finding this beautiful to use this with .NET. I think I really need to get more into it in order to more clearance of what questions to formulate, and that's why I asked it first about authentication, and which is something I will be dealing with a lot because of my services. But I think again I need to have a first hands into the code, so that's what I plan to do this week. So hopefully next week, if you plan to do this meeting again, I will be, getting more into the technical details about this. But in general, I'm really impressed and loving the idea of using all of these tools for this. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, I think I've heard similar things of even, very vocal, very active Python users or appreciate, maybe surprisingly, that, oh, it's nice that they can also have things in C# as well. And certainly for the C# users who may have felt that in the past that they've been left out from all this like fun ML stuff that's been happening in the open source. We have heard that, that they're appreciative that they at least have something that they can use. And so
Yeah, and it's not only, sorry to participate again. It's not only because of just preferences or just because I like more one language or the other. It's more about, efficiency in some aspects. I know for sure Python is doing great steps about this particular, but I don't know. I still can't compare the improvements in speed, for example, for everything we have in .NET 8, all of the other stuff that we will be having in other parts, not only the integration with the ML, but everything else you need to do behind that. And having the efficiency of .NET, of C# in this is valuable for me. I know for sure for too many people using .NET in all of the development and not only for everything else, and having Python for ML, it makes little sense, So that's why exactly I appreciate this, because of everything else that we have from .NET.
for sure. Thank you for saying that. Okay, we have the last 2 minutes. Any last words for anybody? Any requests? Not. Thank you all for coming. And yes, we will be here next week. So see you all later. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.